Okay, so right now is Zephaniah. And you can see on the screen I've got lumped together Zephaniah, Nahum, and Habakkuk. I have those lumped together because roughly these three books are all roughly the same time. They're reflecting the outlook in Judah specifically. Don't forget, Judah is in the south, Israel to the north. So this is the outlook in Judah, specifically under King Josiah. Now I don't have on the PowerPoint slide BC, but you do know that is correct. 640 to 609 BCE. This is after the north has fallen, and Josiah is king in the south. And of course, you'll remember Josiah as the king who finds the law and institutes the national reforms after the anti-reforms of his predecessor Manasseh. So, reflects the outlook in Judah under Josiah. And it also tells us about the historical rise of Babylon and, of course, the fall of Assyria. So that's kind of our context of the three. Now, Zephaniah, it's very interesting because Zephaniah breaks about a half century of silence during Manasseh's reign. And you may think that's kind of interesting or kind of odd that the prophets would just fall silent under Manasseh. But remember we said in class that if someone wants to institute a counter-reform against Yahweh, the first thing you have to do is to silence the prophets. And Manasseh is great at that. So Manasseh silences the prophets effectively for about a half century, and Zephaniah is the first to step up and break the silence after Manasseh. Now Zephaniah's prophecies combined with Jeremiah to spark the reforms under Josiah. There are several scholars who believe that it is not just Josiah that sparks the reforms, but again, as I just mentioned, Zephaniah's prophecies combining with that of Jeremiah, lending credence one to another, is what sparks the reforms under Jeremiah. Now, still, there's a third option that some scholars believe, and we'll talk about this in detail when we get to Jeremiah, and that is that Josiah didn't actually do any reforms, that it was all just a masquerade in order to cover up the social evils, and that Jeremiah just did not fall for it. So when we get to Jeremiah, that'll be an interesting point of view. So that's kind of the third point of view regarding how that reformation, if you will, or those reforms actually happened under Josiah. So Zephaniah combines with Jeremiah to spark the reform. And in Zephaniah's book, the primary concern for him is Jerusalem. Now, one thing about Zephaniah is Zephaniah, when he is writing, his writing happens during the reign of Josiah, as we mentioned before, but it is before the reforms, which is how we're able to make the connection between Zephaniah and Jeremiah as kind of this catalyst for reform. So it is during the reign of Josiah, but it is before the reforms of Josiah, and we find that from some literary clues within the text. So Jerusalem is the primary concern with Zephaniah. Let's take a look at the structure here. The structure is very easily. There's really only two sections. There's the first section from 1:2 to 3:7, and I'm pulling out 1:1 because that is the introductory remarks. But 1:2 to 3:7 talks of the threat of judgment and also specific judgments for specific nations. And you see the list here. First to Judah, then to Philistia, Moab, Ammon, Cush, Assyria, and Jerusalem. Notice the two bookends there, Judah and Jerusalem. Again, Zephaniah is completely demolishing this idea that the Israelites, especially those in the south under Judah, have a blank check from Yahweh. Again, the idea that since the temple is in the south and since the Davidic line remains in the south, of course Yahweh would never let anything happen to the south because they're the chosen people. Well, the prophets are speaking up saying, no, the world revolves around justice and not a title. So Judah, Jerusalem will suffer the same fates as Philistia, Moab, Ammon, Cush, and Assyria. So that's 1:2 through 3:7, 3:8 through 3:20 is the the hope for deliverance. Now, just like Amos, Zephaniah has this, not a preoccupation, but he definitely does have a great of attention or time that he spends to the theme of the day of the Lord. If you remember back to Amos, and this is found in Amos 5:18 through 20, you will see that Amos redefines what the people believe the day of the Lord is going to be like. So many people believe that the day of the Lord was such a great day. It's going to be a day in which we have parties in the streets and all things are set right. And Amos says, well, yeah, that's what it would be like if you were living up to your end of the bargain, if you were living according to the rules of justice, but you're not. So therefore, the day of the Lord is going to be darkness. It's not going to be light. Zephaniah also takes the time to kind of look at the day of the Lord and reimagine that. Let's take a look in 1:8, Zephaniah 1:8. On the day of the Lord's sacrifice, I will punish the officials and the king's sons and all those clad in foreign clothes. On that day I will punish all who avoid stepping on the threshold, who fill the temple of their gods with violence and deceit. So this day of the Lord, not a pretty thing. On that day, the Lord's sacrifice, I will punish the officials and the king's sons. So obviously there is no blank check here. Everyone will fall under the judgment of the justice of God according to the prophets. So Israel believed that God would vindicate them. But the question is, really, what happens when God vindicates those who have been oppressed? So the Israelites believed that God was going to vindicate them, but in reality what God is going to do is vindicate those who have been oppressed. Well, what happens if you as the people of God are the oppressors? Then that vindication looks a lot like judgment. And again, this is what the prophets are saying. No one is immune from this standard of justice. If you commit injustice, you will be judged accordingly for that. So they believed that God was going to vindicate them, but in reality, Zephaniah is saying, no, God is going to vindicate those who have been oppressed. And if you're the oppressor, then watch out. You have something that's about to come towards you. There's a great question that Zephaniah raises within his work, and that's simply the question, does God change God's mind? Let's look at a couple of passages here. In 1:17, it says, I will bring such distress on all people that they will grope about like those who are blind, because they have sinned against the Lord. Their blood will be poured out like dust, and their entrails like dung. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to save them on the day of the Lord's wrath. So here we have just a gruesome picture of what is to come. Such distress coming to the people. They will grope about like those who are blind, because they have sinned against the Lord. Now, if we flip over one chapter to chapter 2, looking in verses 1 through 3, we see a slightly different picture. It says, gather together, gather yourselves together, you shameful nation, before the decree takes effect, and that day passes like windblown chaff. Before the Lord's fierce anger comes upon you, before the day of the Lord's wrath comes upon you, seek the Lord, all you humble of the land, you who do what he commands. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you will be sheltered on the day of the Lord's anger. So in chapter 1, he says, really, there's nothing that you can do. You're going to face this judgment. But here in chapter 2, as he is summoning Judah, he simply says, this is what's going to happen. The Lord's anger is going to be there. But if you humble yourself, if you repent, seek righteousness, seek humility, perhaps you will be sheltered on the day of the Lord's anger. So what happens? Does God change God's mind? Is it that God says, I'm going to destroy you all, but then at the last minute says, well, no, some of you will be changed, or some of you will be spared? Well, this tension really is only a problem for us. The prophets didn't have a problem with this tension at all. They, as we've said before, the prophets are in the precarious position to where they are judged according to whether or not their message comes true. But yet the whole point of the prophecy is to change people so that they do not go through what the prophet is prophesying for them. So the prophet is, in essence, dooming himself or herself to failure, because they need to succeed in order to be judged as a good prophet, but they don't want to succeed, because if they succeed in getting and seeing their message come to pass, then that means the people did not heed their warning. And again, we talked about the Christmas Carol logic here, the idea of the three spirits, past, present, and future, showing Scrooge, what his life is going to be like, only to get to the end of the book to hear that, well, you're showing me these things so that I can go back and change. And that's what the prophets are doing. They're trying to effect change in the present by showing a vision of what is to come in the future. So they have this tension. God is going to destroy, but if you repent, God may hold back some wrath. And the prophets are, like I said, they're willing to live within that tension. All right, so that's Zephaniah. Like I said, we're going to fly through a lot of these. So that's Zephaniah. Let's turn our attention to Nahum. Nahum is, if you just like literature, Nahum is a great book to go look through, because it's just, literarily, it's just a beautiful work. The name Nahum simply means comforted. And if we try to put a date on this book, we're going to put it between 663 and 612 BCE. 663 is a date that I'm giving you, and I'll show you why in just a moment. 612 is what your book says, and that's because 612 is the fall of Nineveh. Nineveh is, of course, the capital of Assyria. So 612 is when Assyria falls to Babylon. The reason we also put 663 is because there's a peculiar reference in chapter 3, verse 8. Let me pull the reference up here. Okay, so in Nahum chapter 3, verse 8, "Are you better than Thebes, situated on the Nile, with water around her? The river was her defense, the waters her wall. Cush and Egypt were her boundless strength. Put in Libya were among her allies, yet she was taken captive and went into exile. Her infants were dashed into pieces at every street corner. Lots were cast for her nobles, and all her great men were put in chains." So this reference here to the fall of Thebes, well, obviously Thebes has fallen according to the text, so this is after 663, which is when Thebes falls, but it is somewhere right around or before the fall of Nineveh in 612. So we have a date range 663 to 612, more than likely closer to 612 than 663. But the majority of this book is about the destruction of Nineveh. And as a matter of fact, we see some imagery within the book that says Nineveh has fallen. So for all intents and purposes, you need to say 612 is the date of this book. 663, we reference it because it is another date that we have been given within the text in order to further substantiate the claim. So 612, fall of Nineveh, and the book is entirely or almost entirely directed towards Nineveh and its fall. And Nahum, the prophet, shows no mercy. Some have suggested that this is a New Year's liturgy, or a book that would be read at a New Year's festival or autumn festival, specifically in 612, to basically glory in the fact that Nineveh and in all of its glory has now fallen to the Babylonians. So Israel saw the fall of Israel as judgment against them, judgment against Assyria for what it had done to both the north and the south, completely devastating the north, and in the south, they inflict great damage upon Jerusalem, although they never actually take over Jerusalem. Now, there's one very interesting fact of Nahum, and it's the fact that Nahum is one of the only prophets that does not address the issue of sin. And Nahum is centered around what would have been the remnant of the south, or the remaining part of the south that was not the vassal state to Assyria, but it It centers around the south, and it is entirely silent about the sins of Israel. So you have to ask the question, well, the prophets were concerned about what was wrong inside of the nation, so why would it be silent? And the answer is found in the fact that it is written during the time of Josiah. During Josiah, we have national reforms that are instituted. The worship of Yahweh is encouraged across the land. And so really, according to Nahum, if you buy into the idea that Josiah institutes reforms, then what sin is there to talk about? Everything is good. Everything is right, because you have the reforms of Josiah that have turned the religious world upside down. One of the big questions that Nahum has is the question of how do you reconcile the curse of Yahweh with the blessing of Yahweh. Let's take just a moment to look at that. In Nahum 1, Nahum 1, 7 through 8, we see that the Lord is good, a refuge in time of troubles. He cares for those who trust in him, but with an overwhelming flood, he will make an end of Nineveh. He will pursue his foes into the realm of darkness. So the Lord is good, a refuge in the time of trouble, but with an overwhelming flood, he will make an end to those in Nineveh. And again in 14 through 15, the Lord has given a command concerning you, Nineveh. You will have no descendants to bear your name. I will destroy the images and idols that are in the temple of your gods. I will prepare your grave, for you are vile. Look, there on the mountains, the feet of one who brings good news, who proclaims peace. Celebrate your festivals, Judah, and fulfill your vows. No more will the wicked invade you. They will be completely destroyed. So you have this same God who is giving out curses against Nineveh, who is saying in verse 14, you're going to have no more descendants to bear your name. I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to destroy the temples, the idols. I'm going to prepare your grave. Away with you. And then the very next statement, look, there on the mountains, the feet of one who brings good news, who proclaims peace. So how do we reconcile this? How do we reconcile this deity who brings curses with such ease, but then also in the very next breath brings blessings? Well, the prophets, they don't try to reconcile it. That's something that we do looking back on the text. The prophets live in that tension of this volatile deity that can in one moment enact cursing and in another moment enact blessing, but both are under the auspice of justice. The curse comes because someone has oppressed another, and blessing comes because one has upheld their relationship with another. So if you are just, you will receive blessing. If you are promoting injustice, then you will be cursed. And it goes back to this whole idea of an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. If you do this, then Yahweh will respond accordingly. If you do good, Yahweh responds with blessing. Do bad, Yahweh responds with a curse. So it goes back to the whole idea, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And that brings us to the end of Nahum. Next up is Habakkuk. And each of these books, when we're talking about these books, especially the book of the 12, and when we start talking about these smaller prophets towards the end, that you find towards the end of the Old Testament, which we're talking about now, people often call them the minor 12. That is just a horrible or a poor way of referring to them, because when we think of a minor 12, we think of prophets who have a minor message, a message that is subservient to the real prophets or the good prophets. And that's just simply not the case. Their message is just as important, just as valid as the rest of the prophets. They are referred to the minor prophets because of the length of their works, because they are smaller in nature than, say, Isaiah or Jeremiah. A better way to probably reference them is according to how they were first grouped. And they were first grouped together in a single scroll, and so they were originally known as the Book of the 12. That's a much more helpful way of defining them, because it doesn't lend itself to the idea of a major and minor prophet, but it lets us know that these were all grouped together, and it is because of their brevity that they are grouped together. So these 12 what have been known as the Minor 12. This is also the Book of the 12. And as we're going through these, they are very short. So please, if you find yourself extremely interested in a few of these, just pick up the Bible and start reading them. There's no substitute for reading this for yourself. So I would definitely encourage you to do that as we go through these, just to read them straight through from front to back. Okay, so Habakkuk. Regarding the date of Habakkuk, we will put a date approximately 625 to 598, and the reason that we put this date, let's just turn to the passage. In Habakkuk 1:6, it says, I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own. So this reference is, of course, to Babylon sweeping over and building up its empire, which a lot of scholars have read into this and said, well, this is after the fall of Assyria, and then also it is leading us into the destruction of the south. Well, 598 is when Nebuchadnezzar, ruler of the Babylonians, attacks Judah, and this is again 598. So the dating that we have here between 625 and 598, primarily because of this reference to the Babylonians coming through, and then also we know the fact that it would not have been after Nebuchadnezzar attacks Judah in 598. Regarding the structure is entirely centered around a series of question and answers, a back and forth, oftentimes between, let's just look at it. In chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, the big question is, God has not judged Judah's wickedness. And why is that? Because Judah is obviously wicked according to the prophet Habakkuk. So he's asking God, why have you not done this yet? We've been saying that Judah will be judged. Why have you not judged? Well, the answer comes to Habakkuk, and the answer is, well, God is going to judge, but it will be the Babylonians who will judge. Okay, the Babylonians are not they're not part of the chosen people. So the next question becomes, how can a righteous God use the wicked, people who are not chosen, to punish those who are, to punish the righteous? And the answer comes in two forms. And this is the totality of chapter 2. And the answer is, well, a righteous remnant will be preserved. So this judgment will be fierce, but it will not be total. Okay, it will not wipe out Israel. There will be a remnant that will be preserved. And then the second part is a taunt song. And this taunt song is that Babylon will be repaid for everything they do to Judah. So everything that happens to Judah will come back to Babylon, and they will be repaid for being the instrument of destruction of Judah. And then chapter 3 is Habakkuk's response to the whole thing, and his response to the people. And his response to the people after these questions and answers are that God does save a remnant, so this will not be a total destruction. And God will punish Babylon for what they are doing now. So he instills hope in the people by saying there will be a remnant that will be saved, and also that the oppressors will not go unpunished. All right, so that takes us through Habakkuk, and we just have two more. Jeremiah is a little bit bigger. Jeremiah is not part of the Book of the 12. His work is a little more encompassing, if you will. It's written primarily to Judah. It is written entirely to Judah, actually. And it begins with the reign of Josiah, which begins in 626 BCE. And he is writing on the threshold of the Jerusalem collapse. Now, we often call Jeremiah, as you see on the screen, we call him the ground zero prophet. And the reason for that is if you look at Isaiah, and when I refer to Isaiah, I'm referring to the three Isaiahs, first Deutero and Trito Isaiahs. When you look at Isaiah is very much, he is looking ahead, but he is looking from above as well. So you get the idea that Isaiah is a bit removed from what is going on. But Jeremiah is exactly the opposite. Jeremiah, as he is writing, through his writing style, you get this idea that, as he is putting the pen to the paper, a wall is falling outside of his house because the Babylonians are sieging the city. I mean, he's right in the middle of it. So because of that, we call him the ground zero prophet. He is writing from the midst of the battle. In chapter 1, verse 4 through 8, we see a few details about Jeremiah as a prophet. We see he is specifically a young prophet. Let's take a moment just to flip over to Jeremiah 1, and we'll go 4 through 8. The word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Alas, sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak. I am too young. But the Lord said to me, Do not say I am too young. You must go to everyone I send you to, and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you, and will rescue you, declares the Lord. So we see, first and foremost, that he is young. And when we look at his role as a prophet, so this youngster, what is his word, what is his prophecy really going to be like? Well, we pick up in verse 9, Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth and said to me, I have put my words in your mouth. Verse 10, See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot, to tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. So this language in verse 10, uproot, tear down, destroy, overthrow, build, and plant, that becomes the paradigm for the rest of the book. He is going to do each of these three: uproot, tear down, destroy, overthrow, and build and plant. And that is a tall order for someone who is so young to have to go and deliver to a nation. His message, he apparently does not write his message to start out with. Jeremiah uses a scribe to help get his message written down. And this message probably does not just include his material, but some scholars have suggested it would include the prophetic utterances from different prophets for about 20 years before Jeremiah. So whatever it included to start out with, Baruch is writing this down. Baruch is a scribe, and he writes this down in the winter 605 to 604 BCE. And the scroll that Baruch crafts for Jeremiah begins to make its way around. People begin to hear this, and it begins to be read. And when he begins to read this out loud, word of the scroll gets to King Jehoiakim. And when King Jehoiakim hears the scroll, he immediately has portions of the scroll cut out and thrown into the fire. And so we have this first scroll that is completely gone. It's thrown into the fire. And so Baruch returns to Jeremiah, and Jeremiah begins dictating a second scroll. Now this second scroll, along with the words of Jeremiah and possibly what has been included before Jeremiah as well, the second scroll causes Jehoiakim to go and to issue warrants for the arrest of both Jeremiah and Baruch, but they have already gone into hiding. So the second scroll, for the most part, is what we have today for the book of Jeremiah. There are a few instances here and there. There's a couple of chapters that scholars believe got put in later. Possibly even the story of Baruch and the two scrolls. Some believe that may have been an addition that was added by a redactor at a later date. But still, the majority of the book of Jeremiah is believed to be authentic to this second scroll that is crafted by Baruch, if that is a historical event. Looking at the content of the book, it is talking specifically about Babylon as the judge coming into Judah to judge them for their sins against Yahweh, and it is structured very much in a covenant lawsuit manner. So he is indicting the people on certain charges, and Yahweh, of course, has found them guilty, and because of their guilt, Yahweh is going to judge them accordingly. So Babylon is the chosen mode of judgment, and there is a lawsuit that is presented against the people. In chapter 27 and 28, if you remember when we talked about the prophets and about how they get their message across, one of those ways is through acting their message out. And so Jeremiah, what he does in chapter 27 and 28 is there's a competing prophet to Jeremiah named Hananiah, who is going through the town basically saying Jeremiah is a liar, because Jeremiah's prophecy is that there is nothing you can do, Jerusalem. There's nothing you can do, Judah. Babylon is going to come and destroy you. It's just a matter of time, and you need to prepare yourself. And of course, Hananiah says, no. God is not going to destroy the holy city. And so he goes and preaches against Jeremiah. And so Jeremiah, in order to get his message across, what he does is he puts himself inside of a yoke. So he wears a yoke around town, so a wooden yoke that goes, his head is in the middle of that, his, arms attached to the outside edges. So this yoke that is binding Jeremiah is supposed to refer to the yoke that is about to be put on the south through Babylon. And Hananiah simply comes out and says, no, this isn't the case, takes the wooden yoke and destroys it. And so Jeremiah goes and he doesn't give up. What he does this time is he gets a metal yoke and places it upon him and walks through the town with the metal yoke. And so Jeremiah is saying that there's nothing you can do. The yoke of the Babylonians is coming. The judgment is coming through Babylon. And so you better get ready. And in chapter 29, he makes this just crazy statement to say, not only is Babylon going to come in and is going to destroy the city, but you're going to be taken into exile, and in this exile, you are not coming back home anytime soon. So, go ahead and build a house. Get ready. You're going to be there for a while. Plant vineyards, and go about your life as normal. So, because of statements like this, and also the next thing on the slide that you see is that the gates are open. What Jeremiah does is Jeremiah goes to King Zedekiah and says, if you want any chance to save Jerusalem, if you want any chance to save your life and to save the temple, you must open the gates to the city and allow Babylon to come in and take the city. Otherwise, we will all perish, or we will all be sent into exile because of our refusal to give in. There's nothing that we can do. Good Jews thought that Jeremiah was very much a political revolutionary or subversive. So he was actually at one point thrown into prison as the Babylonians were coming into town because he was looked at as a traitor against the nation. Because again, how could a good Jew believe that Yahweh would allow destruction of the city? So Jeremiah speaking out against Israel gets him into a lot of trouble, and so he's kind of seen as the anti-patriotic prophet, or the non-patriotic prophet. And on top of that, you'll see, I believe we'll talk about on the next slide, Jeremiah, you get a lot of clues within Jeremiah that show that he does not believe in the reforms of Josiah. So he says, even the good king of Israel is not all that he's cracked up to be, because it's just a cover for the injustice that is happening inside of the nation. So he is the anti-patriotic prophet, if you will, but he still offers hope to the people. So even in the midst of this great judgment that's going to happen, he offers hope. In chapter 32, he goes and buys a field in Anoth, and he takes the deed with him and says, hey, you know what? When we return back to our land, it's going to be a while, but when we do, this little piece of ground, this is mine. I'm coming back to this. So this one act is a way of acting out his belief that the exile will not last forever, that they will be able to come back in to the promised land and maintain that for themselves. Now, when the South finally falls, when Jerusalem finally falls to Babylon, Jeremiah is given safe haven in Babylon because he is seen as someone who is very helpful to Babylon. They have apparently heard of how he, stood up against those in the South and said, we need to allow Babylon to come in. However, Jeremiah ends up, by the end of the book, he's in Egypt. And when he gets to Egypt, where the book leaves him is that he is prophesying in Egypt. He's giving his message in Egypt. So you can't keep this guy down. You can't, really shut him up. He has a message and he wants to get it out there. So Jeremiah at the end of the book is in Egypt, not in Babylon. And the rest of the inhabitants of the southern kingdom, Judah, Jerusalem, are all scattered out. Some back into Babylon, some into Egypt. And this is what we refer to as the diaspora, their scattering of the Jews. So their homeland is no longer their homeland. In chapter 31, verses 31 through 33, is a passage that, if you've gone to church or synagogue, you're probably familiar with this. Probably more familiar within a Christian context than a Jewish context. But it is what, it is what gets picked up as a quote, new covenant by many Christian traditions. And it says in verse 31, "The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, 'Know the Lord,' because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more." So this beautiful passage about a covenant promise, all coming from Jeremiah. So in the midst of the great sadness and destruction, there is a great hope as well for Jeremiah. Now, let's take just a moment and look at Zedekiah. Zedekiah is the last king of the south, and it is Zedekiah that Jeremiah pleads to open up the city gates. And he says to Zedekiah, if you don't do this, you yourself will be taken off into exile. And this actually does come to pass, and it's actually a little bit worse than that, because when the south falls to Babylon, Zedekiah is taken out of the city. His family is killed right before his eyes, and then his eyes are put out. So that is the very last thing he will see, and then he is taken in stocks off into captivity into Babylon. So does not end well for Zedekiah because of his refusal to open up the gates and allow them in, according to the prophet Jeremiah. So that takes us through Jeremiah, and we've got one last one that we're going to talk about, and this one is very short. This one is Obadiah. Obadiah is a very short book, one of the shortest that we have. And Obadiah is not written to the north, it's not written to the south, it is written to Edom. Okay, and as far as the dating goes on this, it follows the destruction of the south in 587, 586, so we can put it short time after that. But the occasion for the book, the reason that Obadiah is writing this message, or giving this message, is because after Babylon destroys the south, they begin to loot the cities, and several nations join in this looting with Babylon, and one of these nations is Edom. And so Obadiah he is fired up about the idea that Edom would come in and help plunder Judah. And the reason that he is extremely upset about the fact that Edom is coming to plunder Judah is because of who Edom represents. Edom, the nation of Edom, is composed or comprised of those who are descendants of Esau. Esau, you will remember from Jacob and Esau, is a relative of the Israelites. So this is, in essence, a brother who is coming in, and while the south, while this other brother is down, comes in and begins plundering and basically kicking them while they are down. And Obadiah has had it with them. And so the entire oracle of Obadiah is against the Edomites and about judgment that will befall them because of their plundering of the south after the fall to Babylon. So that's it. That's all that we're going to do tonight. So, or today, whenever you're listening to this. So that takes us through Obadiah. We'll pick up with Ezekiel and a few more of the 12. I don't have my full list here in front of me, but we'll pick up with those on Monday when I see you in class. So I hope you have a good weekend, and we'll see you then.